Okay, so I have a couple things that I think will help with your hooks. These are just tips that I noticed based on the video that you sent. It's just one angle, so it's kind of hard to see exactly what you're doing, of course. I'm not an expert by any means, but I do have this trick pretty good. So like most tricks, just experiment with these notes, kind of see what works best for you. It's not set in stone, right? You can do whatever really works best for you, however you can get the trick, right? So the two major things I notice is that it looks like you're having trouble getting the loop to form cleanly, and you're having a bit of trouble getting the catch. Your form is pretty good, you got the whip pretty okay, but there's a couple pieces that seem to be not lining up quite right to make this all come together for you. So the first thing, getting a clean loop, is consisted of a few parts. The first thing is making sure you actually pop the yo-yo high enough. If it's too low, you don't have enough time, is really the bottom line, to get the string around quick enough. Or it makes it a lot unnecessarily difficult. So I like to try to pop to kind of about this range, middle of my chest or so. I don't really have to move my arm at kind of weird positions to catch it from that height, so it works well for me. So that's the first thing. The second thing, let me check my notes over here. Oh, yes, is tracing a 270. So in your video, it looks like when you actually do the whip, you do more of a 180, and you'll notice that even if I go kind of hard, if I stop at 180, the loop doesn't really come around very nice. Your best attempts are the ones where you actually trace a 270 and start throwing the string back upwards. I do this with a little flick of my wrist at the end, and it kind of gives it an extra little push, I find. You can experiment with what works best for you, but ultimately that goes a long way towards getting the loop to actually come up and over. And then once you stick your finger out, it'll spin much faster. It makes it a lot easier from there. So that's the second thing. The third thing is where your throw hand is relative to the yo-yo when you're doing the whip. That's how you control the width of the actual loop. So this will be easier to see from this side. So if I whip the yo-yo, or sorry, whip the string and put my hand around here or in front of the yo-yo, that loop is going to be very narrow and it's going to be hard to catch. Fundamentally what you're doing is the string comes around, back up this way, over your finger, and you get that same part that's attached to the yo-yo, right? So everything back here, this section attached to your finger, doesn't really matter where it is. So you can put their throw hand a little bit behind the yo-yo when you actually do it, and you'll see that makes a much nicer loop than if you do it right in front or right underneath, whereas it tends to swing around a bit. So when I do them, I actually kind of catch them like this most of the time, unless I'm going into something or coming out of something. You can see it's not really entirely over my index finger, and that allows me to aim where that string coming off the yo-yo actually goes. So that's the third part for that. So those three things together, the height that you pop it at, oh, and the width of your circle. Because you only do 180, I notice you kind of go down right into it immediately. Try to go outwards more. Pull the string away so it keeps that tightness, and then give it the loop. If it's kind of slacked to begin with, it's going to be hard to keep it organized. So if you make a wider circle, that should make a nice clean loop for you. So yeah, those two things, popping it up high enough, 270, and making sure it's a wide circle, and making sure to put your throw hand a little bit behind the yo-yo will help keep the loop the shape that you want it to be. For the catch, there's two things. The 5-7 position with the numpad I was talking about. So I'll just show you very simply. I put my finger about here, right? So just in the upper left corner of the yo-yo. Well, my left, I guess it'll be the right on the video. This makes sure if it's above, when the loop swings around, it actually has to hit the bearing and then loop underneath before the yo-yo falls out of it, right? Because the string's on top of the bearing like this, the axle. So that makes it more difficult to actually catch. It needs more momentum, it has to be faster, and especially when you're learning, you don't want that. So having it so that the yo-yo ends up just beneath your finger is what you want. This is a lot easier to do, which brings me to the second point, if you put your finger where the yo-yo is, instead of trying to pop the yo-yo to your finger. Right, but if you just go there, you're pretty much always going to have it in the right spot, and you can adjust for instances where you don't have it exactly where you want. And it's more practical as well, because if you were to do a hook out of like trapeze or something, you're not gonna have your finger where you want it necessarily in like popping the string up. It just doesn't work very well. So it's a lot easier if you put your finger where it is in the long run. But again, you know, if you can figure it out that way, or however you can figure it out, that's ultimately all you need to do. So give those a try, and hopefully that helps.